This video is not trying to defend the abusive monetization strategies, fear of missing out, sell now, fix later mentality of live service games. The purpose of this video is to point out some obvious positives that live services are capable of, and dispel the stigma that while most live service games are greedy cash grabs, not all of them are, and hint at the possibility that they actually can be innovative, creative ways to make games that's not seen in other genres. Hello. So, this is not a topic I would think about covering on this channel, but after the last couple months, after watching countless jabs on how live service games are ruining creativity, live service games are the death of gaming, etc., etc., I understand that negativity tends to pick up more traction, and I do agree with a lot of the points said. This got me thinking, are there actually any positives to the live service genre of games that no other models of game development can do? Well, after some digging online and talking to players among different live service game communities, my answer to this question is a resounding yes. But before we get to that, I would like to thank my Discord server for providing me with some helpful insights to the topic of this video, as well as any other people online for helping me bridge the gap of any knowledge regarding games that I don't play very often. So let's start by answering a simple question. What qualifies as a live service game? Well, after browsing multiple sources, here are the general qualifications I've found. Live service games are sometimes referred to as GaaS or games as a service, where the idea is that 1. The game receives new content indefinitely. 2. Gets funded via some sort of long-term, consistent monetization strategy. 3. Attempts to keep players engaged with the game for as long as the game is being serviced. And 4. The game requires an online connection or has its major component being online. Since there is no objective definition, let's assume that these definitions, and only when all of them are met, will qualify a game as live service. Okay, so this is a good point to start off of. Let's go through each of the 4 criteria and talk about how they can contribute negatively or positively to the player experience. The fact that a game can be developed indefinitely can be a double-edged sword, given that a live service will have to provide new content within a reasonable amount of time to keep a consistent and satisfied player base. That by itself can be challenging to meet. Of course, a common complaint about this model of development is that new content is often drip-fed to you. But I believe this problem goes a bit deeper than that. If you spend too little time developing new content, players might think that the new content doesn't add much and that it's not engaging nor creative. However, take too long developing new content, and the player base will grow impatient that there is no new stuff and begin to leave. There's just no simple solution to the argument that live services have shallow and grindy gameplay, because there has to be some kind of compromise between update frequency and quality, unless a game company can do both, as rare as that may be. The main ingredient to long-term success with a live service game, at least in my opinion, is player trust. If you promise to deliver content in a given quantity, in a given time frame, and actually fulfill that promise, then it doesn't exactly matter how little or much content you bring out in a specific time frame. What matters is that you delivered on your promise. Having good relationship between the development team and the player base goes a long way, because you need a constant player base to play and support your game in order for the model to be sustainable. Loyalty works both ways. Are you giving players what they want? Are you sticking with your development plan and listening to feedback? If you're consistent, keep your update schedules, go above and beyond what you promised, the player base will appreciate that, and they will continue to play the game. On the other hand, if you release buggy patches, insubstantial content updates, and does not prioritize what players want or release content not up to expectations, you will erode trust with the player base, and likely lose out on potential revenue, or even lose your entire player base altogether. As it turns out, keeping good relationship between developers and players in real time is very important when your game requires constant funding to continue operating. While you definitely hear about the numerous times that live service games pump out content buggy and broken, I can say with absolute certainty that there are examples of companies that have continued to keep up with player expectations, and have thrived as a result. Another topic related to game development time is the matter that some games release as buggy and unfinished, and the live service model sort of blankets that by assuring players that problems will be fixed later. This, I believe, should not be the case. It doesn't matter what genre of game you release, you always have an obligation to release it in a finished state. I absolutely will not defend any games that release broken, live service or not. And I think we as a community are becoming more aware of this. I also want to give some shoutouts to live service games that did release in a satisfactory state. Hoyo vs. new Honkai Star Rail game keeps the company's consistency as always, releasing games and patches in an extremely polished manner. The new Diablo 4, despite its controversies, did launch in a stable way, with very little complaints about bugs or glitches. So while the problem of unreleased games continue, I don't think this problem is exclusive to live service games. Especially this year alone, this trend has spiraled even more, and I think gamers are as perceptive to this as ever. And I think we're doing a good job of saying, enough is enough, you got one chance to release the game in full, and if you can't do that, your game is done. Let's take a look at our second topic. Live services need a constant revenue stream to keep developing new content. This is usually the point of contention for a lot of backlash. When you hear about monetization and live services, you often think of abusively priced microtransactions, expensive skins, and loot boxes. However, these strategies are not the only ways to fund a live service game. Of course, I absolutely do not wish to defend these practices. They are predatory and not representative of any game developers that genuinely want to make a good game would do. So let's explore the other side. What are some ways that a live service game can generate consistent revenue to expand its development? I personally come up with 3 ways to do this, without the uses of the predatory practices I mentioned. Number 1 is that you sell only cosmetics. Now I know some people are gonna say, but cosmetics do impact your gameplay experiences. They are part of gameplay. Well, let's assume that you made a free-to-play live service game, and you need to monetize it somehow. If you're not selling skins, then what exactly should you be selling? If you sold, say, gameplay advantages, premium armors or weapons, then people will say that your game is pay to win. And I think I speak for most people when I say that I don't want to play a game that's pay to win. There's also the matter that some skins these days are absolutely price gouged. While I think I can tolerate skins if the game itself was free to play, but if you already required a $70 entry fee to play the game like Diablo 4, and selling $20 skins on top of that, that's a little too much. A good example of this being done is in Deep Rock Galactic, where the player base is so supportive of the game that they will tell you to not buy the skin packs on discount just so that you can give more money to the developers. Method number 2 is that you lock the game behind a subscription. Like some MMOs, you'll need a constant monthly fee to play the game. However, once you pay, there's no other microtransactions or additional costs. So all players will play on the same footing with no advantages over others. Of course, the idea that a gamer needing a subscription to play can feel a little daunting, so this might not be the best strategy if you don't already have an established audience that can speak about your game's quality. Finally, method number 3 is that you make the experience primarily single player. In order for a game to be considered pay to win, there needs to be a comparison between 2 players or a win state that can be reached faster if you pay. But let's take a look at Genshin Impact. Sure, you could spend a little extra to buy skins, in-game gold, upgrade materials, or monster loot drops. But where exactly is the win condition? Where is the leaderboard that compares the power level between other players? Because the game itself is a casual single-player experience, despite being a live service. It allows you to focus on the things you want to do, not necessarily the things you need to do. And before you ask, no, beating Spiral Abyss is not a win state. You gain relatively little rewards for doing it, and it is an optional challenge to test your skills. But does the story require a large amount of grinding? Well, not really. Someone out there has beaten the entire Genshin storyline so far with only the starter characters. So hopefully I've outlined some ways that I believe that a live service game can monetize itself without being profit-driven. As I mentioned, I do understand that a constant revenue stream is required to continue a game's development, but it doesn't have to be done in a way that's predatory in nature. Okay, let's move on to the third criteria of a live service game. This one's interesting. The game needs some way to retain the player's attention and keep them playing for as long as the game is being serviced. One common way of doing this is through battle passes or daily reward systems. Now, of course, this can run into the problem that the game itself is not engaging or fun, but you come back every day to not lose your bonuses. Another problem with the battle pass is that it can be too grindy. and it feels like it restricts the way you want to play the game too much before actually letting you have fun. These are valid concerns, and since the live service genre is getting oversaturated, players are becoming more aware of this. In fact, it's evident that some battle passes are having the opposite effect. You want me to grind for 2 hours daily like a second job to keep up with the seasonal rewards? I'm out of here. Once again, we as gamers have as much choice in games as ever before. It's becoming harder and harder for new live services to try and retain players through their grindfest. However, I do believe that there are ways to do a battle pass or daily reward system correctly. Fortnite and Genshin Impact both have battle passes that the player base are satisfied with the time to completion versus the rewards ratio. You actually have a limit on how much XP you can earn in 1 week, and since it takes around 20 minutes to do daily tasks, the game itself is very non-committal. If you don't want to log in for a day, that's okay too. The quests refresh weekly, and assuming that you do most of the quests on time, you can complete the pass with weeks left to spare. Better yet, the shining example of the perfect battle pass in my eyes is once again in Deep Rock Galactic. I was so shocked when I saw it for the first time, because this entire battle pass is free. There's no premium tracks, no other purchases you have to make. If you have the game, you have the full battle pass, no strings attached. There are dailies and weekly quests to keep you engaged, but since every season lasts for about half a year, if you want to take days, weeks, or even months off the game before coming back, you can still finish it in time. So this battle pass system right here,
that's how you do it.
Another popular way of retaining players' engagement in a live service is through the practice of fear of missing out. This can come in a variety of ways: limited events, limited items from shops, limited reward systems. Did you miss that one event-exclusive weapon? Well, you're out of luck because there's no more chances to get it. Now, I understand that everyone has different tolerance levels when it comes to FOMO. Some people don't care about cosmetic items, and some hoarders need absolutely everything in a game to not feel left out. However, regardless of what you may think of FOMO, it's not a hallmark feature of live service games. You don't need FOMO elements in order for a game to be considered a live service. So here are some examples of live services that do not employ FOMO and still have thrived as a result. Don't Starve Together. Indeed will have limited time events, and it indeed rewards you with daily presents. But it has all of its cosmetics added to the general pool of items, so if you missed out on an event, you can still get the items associated with it. Once again, Deep Rock Galactic. If you didn't complete a seasonal battle pass in time, all items are added to the shop as well as appearing in loot drops in-game, so nothing ever goes away. Path of Exile, an MMO that resets itself every 3 months for each season, where all players will start off with the exact same footing. So even if you missed out on previous seasons, you can still jump in at any time without feeling left behind. Guild Wars 2, another MMO, sells you a one-time purchase of its expansions, and you get access to the game permanently. No subscriptions here. So while FOMO is a commonly deployed tactic in live services to keep you playing, it's not mandatory, and there are ways to do limited time events without the use of it. Last but not least, let's talk about the fact that live service games are always online. Given that the game needs server space to operate, should the game reach its end of service or the game fails to capture a player base, then the servers shut down, there's no way to play the game, and your progress is lost. This often gets brought up as a talking point against live services. But once again, there are ways to circumvent this. It's just that it's not normal within the industry. Game preservation is becoming more of a talked-about concern, now with the endless slew of failed live services shutting down and people ending up with a bricked game. However, not all games end up this way. For example, a select few rhythm games like Osu and Step Mania have been around for well more than a decade. And how these games were preserved was to make it purely community-driven. In fact, Step Mania took it one step further and made their game open source, so anyone can do whatever they want with it. To this day, it's remained relevant through a community-driven environment. So what I'm trying to say here is, there are ways to preserve an always online game. It's just that developers usually don't take the effort to do it, and it's something I would like to see more in the future. Okay, so we've talked about all 4 points that make up a live service game and established that there are ways to do this model without being predatory or grindy. But you might still be thinking, so what? Why live service? What do they do that stand out from other game genres? Well, after some research, it kind of ties into a criticism of live services that often gets brought up. Live service games are the killer of creativity in game design. And I gotta say, nah. Let's take a look back in the last year and count instances where a game failed that wasn't a live service. The 2022 reboot of Saints Row, released with bugs, shallow gameplay, and revolting storyline. That wasn't a live service. Forspoken, a game with lifeless characters and millennial humor, released early this year that got its development team shut down. That wasn't a live service. Redfall, a game made by the same devs as Dishonored, flopped because it had an empty world, brain-dead AI, and shallow gameplay. That wasn't a live service. The Lord of Ring Gollum also had its development team shut down because the game failed due to its lackluster controls and quality. Oh, and what's this? Story-rich. Single player. So what am I trying to say here? Well, it seems to me that the lack of creativity in game design is not exclusive to live services. Now, let's take a look at the other side. What are some examples of live service games that actually are creative in their way of game design? Fortnite, a game needing very little explanations, is probably one of the more memed games when it comes to what people think of you if you played it. It actually does its seasonal updates in a really creative way. Now, I primarily played the game back in 2017 when the game was still in its infancy stages. But after some research about the history of this game, I was blown away by the sheer amount of ingenious innovations that the game did to introduce newer seasons that changed itself in drastic ways. The game is a battle royale where you play on a map, but things constantly happen around you as you play. From a mysterious meteor hitting the land and damaging its surrounding areas, to a rocket opening up a rift to another world, to an otherworldly cube descending upon the land and eventually melting into the lake and forming a mystic-looking floating island, these are just some examples of how the world of Fortnite reimagined itself newer and with more features. And the best part? A lot of the changes were happening right before every player's eyes. In Season 9, there was a massive showdown between a giant mech and a Godzilla-like monster, and you got to experience both of them going at it in real time. It's exciting moments like these that makes you wonder, man, maybe I could have been there with everybody and experienced that live. Here's another example of a live service game world undergoing changes in a creative way. The MMO known as Final Fantasy XIV originally did not sell to the highest of expectations. In an elaborate setup as an attempt to give it a reboot, the developers had an event in the original game where a fiery dragon blew up the entire game world. The service shut down and was reborn as Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, which is what the game is known today. If you were playing in 1.0, you could have been there with everybody and witnessed the end of the original world. Games made by Hoyoverse, primarily Genshin Impact and Star Rail, has their signature consistency of polish and quality in its updates. Patches happen every 40 days with new storylines, new characters, fully voiced events, mini-games, new game worlds, and a whole new region coming out after this summer. And meanwhile, Halo is out here extending their season to 10 months. While I don't necessarily agree with Hoyoverse's monetization strategies, what I can't deny is their commitment to making everything as polished as possible, and reinvesting most of the revenue back into the game to make it better than before. I realize there's a lot of stigma surrounding gacha games in general, seeing how it's a loot box/gambling hell, but allow me to present you with an impossible scenario. Maybe the reason why Genshin reaches its level of popularity and reaches top trending tabs whenever new updates drop is not because people are addicted and forced to grind the game, but maybe it's because Genshin is actually a good game. I know, impossible, right? That can't possibly be true. The live service model allows a game to be more immersive by updating the lore, story, and environment live, often in an interactive way with the community as a whole. You get to be there with everybody else, reacting as the very world changes around you. How cool is that? What I'm trying to say with this portion of the video is that there is clearly some creative things that you can do in live service games that can't be done in other genres. So here's my response to the criticism. Live service games don't kill creativity. Greedy companies do. It doesn't matter if you have a single player or online experience. What matters is that you have a clear goal, communicative team, and genuine desire to make a fun game. To conclude, I want to share some of my personal opinions about live service games if you're still on the fence. And I'll do this by asking a single question. Why do we play games? Well, if we boil it down to the simplest terms, We play games because it's fun. In the midst of all the bashing on live service games, hopefully I've shown some light on the bright side of this genre. I often imagine that there are genuine developers out there that want to make a fun, engaging game for a community that's constantly being serviced. Except they get turned off by the massive amount of stigma and ridicule. My advice, when you see a live service game announced, wait till it's actually released before judging it. For a community that seems to discourage pre-ordering games because it's seen as speculative, not representative of the actual product, and that we should wait until it's out before buying, people sure seem to be doing that a lot when live services get announced. A game does not have to have FOMO, abusive monetization schemes, grindy and repetitive playstyles, and paywall content. Because at the end of the day, a live service game can be a game where it just wants you to have fun. The same way gaming has always been.
No way! Oh my god! Oh my god, dude!
Let's go! Oh! Oh my god! Yo, this is so dope! We're rich! Let's go! We're rich!
Thanks for tuning into this video. While you might not be interested in my recent uploads, I'm in the middle of a content transitioning period. So if you enjoy the content of this video, stick around because I plan on uploading more videos analyzing the gaming space just like this one. In the meantime, check out these past video essays that I've done that I'm very proud of. Anyways, this is Psyche signing out, and I hope to see you next time. Peace.